Hello everyone, my name is John, I'm the Geeky Fanboy, and it's July, and I have decided, as you can maybe guess from the outfit and from the background decorations, that July is all gonna be about BBC Sherlock, because we like to talk about Sherlock Holmes on this channel, and July is basically the anniversary of the series. The very first episode, A Study in Pink, came out on the 25th of July 2010. That's now almost 11 years ago. And this show has a very, very special place in my heart. It is still, to this very day, one of my absolute favorite Sherlock Holmes adaptations, even though over the years I have become a little bit more critical of it, but nevertheless, I rewatch the show at least once a year. So yeah, I've decided July is all gonna be about BBC Sherlock, and I thought we're gonna start this off with a basic ranking of all of the Sherlock episodes, meaning we are going to rank 13 episodes, so each episode from each series plus the special, The Abominable Bride, which brings us to 13 episodes. I know there was also a sort of mini special episode, Many Happy Returns, but that one is not going to come up in the ranking. So yeah, that's it for for the introduction. I should mention I have not rewatched any of the episodes specifically for making this list, but like I've said earlier, I have watched each of these episodes many times. And like I said, I watch the show at least once every year, so I feel like I'm up to ranking these episodes. I thought hard about it. I think I sat at my desk for over an hour trying to rank these episodes. So this is mostly based on how much I enjoy these episodes in general, as just, are they good television? Then, of course, are they an interesting Sherlock Holmes mystery? What do they do with the characters? What do they do with the mystery, the case? Are there any Sherlock Holmes references from the canon? How are they worked into the story? And also, naturally, my absolutely subjective opinion as to how much I just like these episodes. There's also probably going to factor, some nostalgia is probably going to factor in there as well, since the first episode came out in 2010. It's been so long. I was 13 years old when series 1 started airing, and I'm 24 now. Oh boy, it's been a decade. But let's just get on with it and let's rank the episodes. So number 13, the worst Sherlock episode is, in my opinion, The Final Problem. I don't think that's a big surprise, since this, I think, is the most infamous Sherlock episode. I would argue this is, I would personally say, the only episode I actively dislike in the series. All the other ones, even number 12 and number 11 on this list, have elements I enjoy, but The Final Problem, when I watched it for the first time back in, when was it, 2017, I finished it sitting in front of the screen and thinking, what the effing hell was that? That was absolute bollocks. So The Final Problem, like I said, is the final episode of the, I think we can say, final series of Sherlock. And it's all about the family reveals. Now, as you may or may not know from watching some of my other Sherlock videos, I'm someone who tends to be more of a Sherlock Holmes purist when it comes to the canon. I'm generally a bit suspicious when they change something about the canon in an adaptation, or add something that's not there. And this theory or this idea of a third Holmes sibling is a popular one. I've talked about it in another video. And when they started mentioning Sharon Ford throughout series 4, I became very nervous, because I was like, oh no, Sharon Ford is the name they usually go with if they do a third Holmes sibling. And granted, Sharon Ford did not turn out to be the sibling, it turned out to be the prison, which I guess it is a neat little Easter egg. But then we still got a third sibling, a sister named Euros, because apparently the Holmes parents are unable to give these kids normal names. So, yeah, the final problem is all about finding out who Euros is, why she was imprisoned in Sharonford, and it's basically the episode where BBC Sherlock decided to be a Saw movie for 90 minutes. So, Sherlock and John go and see Mycroft, and they talk about Euros, then they go to Sharonford in order to, like, talk to her and get to her, but turns out, oh no, Euros is like a super evil mega villain who's super smart, evil genius, and she's basically taken over the prison, and she's gonna play some mind games with her brothers and with Watson. All the while, we have this weird subplot with, oh no, there's a child on a plane and she can't land it, and everyone on the plane is dead and everyone's gonna die, but then it turns out that's actually not real, it's just a fantasy, and it's Euros who is the little kid, and Holmes has to save her, and there are so many reveals, quote unquote, in this episode. So this episode, I don't like this episode because it is absolutely wild in the worst sense possible, especially for Sherlock Holmes adaptations. Because, I don't mind there being, more character-driven episodes, or, trying to bring in maybe some character development or new canon-ish elements. I don't mind that as long as it's done well. But this is peak Moffat writing wherein he tries to be smarter than the source material. And we have so many ridiculous reveals that just make no sense, or you just can't suspend your belief for it, Like, okay, maybe there is a third Holmes sibling. Okay, let's go with that. But, like, she turns out to be an absolutely big evil genius, and then we get, like, oh, Sherlock's mind didn't work properly because of childhood trauma, and the dog we thought he had as a kid isn't actually a dog. It was his best friend who Euros tried to kill, but somehow Sherlock did not remember that and had his mind altered, and Mycroft didn't even tell their parents that their sibling was actually still alive, and it's super weird, it's super wild, it's not entertaining at all. Euros is just your basic psychopath, evil genius woman who, like, either is very menacing or weirdly flirty with everyone in not a good way at all, in any way. And the mind games she plays with the brothers and with Watson are not interesting. Some of them are really dumb. The worst one for me was when Sherlock has to call Molly and has to make her say that she's in love with him or something like that. I hope I remember that correctly. That's the one episode I tend to not rewatch. And it's so dumb because they spend the last couple of episodes establishing that Molly has moved on from Sherlock, that she even found a new boyfriend. Granted, he looks like Sherlock, but it's someone else, and she's moved on. She's become more independent. And then they throw it out the window to have this absolutely horrifying, emotionally horrifying scene for Molly where she's forced to admit to this man who, to a certain degree, has manipulated her throughout the years emotionally. To have her admit that she's still in love with him, it was just so weird and uncomfortable and just wrong. And for some reason, Moriarty kind of is in this episode. I mean, I love Moriarty. I always love seeing Andrew Scott as Moriarty. He's fantastic. But it's just so dumb. Like, for some reason, Mycroft allowed Euros and Moriarty to meet. I don't think there should be any reason why he would allow that. These are the most evil and smartest people Mycroft knows, and he lets them meet up without apparently supervision. And then Moriarty records a bunch of weird messages for Euros that play into the whole, oh, Moriarty might not be dead storyline that doesn't really go anywhere. And yeah, this episode is a huge mess. And I think the only good thing about this is that we have like this cute little montage at the end with like Sherlock and John taking care of the baby, and they go back and adventure together and solve cases, and that's a good note to go out on. But the episode that got us there was just bad. The next episode, number 12, is the Six Thatches. So this is the first episode of Series 4, and yes, you will notice Series 4 is my least favourite series in this show. The Six Thatches is infamous for killing off Mary. Now, I was not angry about that. I wasn't even surprised. I expected them to do that. I did maybe not expect them to do it so soon. Literally 2 episodes, or 3 if you count the special, after John and Mary got married, and then they kill her off like 2 or 3 episodes later. I know a lot of people were mad about that Mary died, and I was like, yeah, but it's in the canon, so I kind of expected it to be there at some point. But the way they do it is so dumb. She literally has like a slow-mo dive in front of a bullet, and then she gets shot, and it's like, oh no, I'm sorry, John, but I will always love you, etc., etc. And then John gets really mad at Sherlock, even though I don't necessarily think it's entirely his fault. And the episode that leads up to this it's not completely bad, but it's not very interesting either. I think they try to expand too much about like Mary's background story, where again Moffat and Gatiss are trying to be too smart. Like, it was fine, I think, at the end of series 3. I was like, okay, on the USB stick, those are my initials, and I used to be like a special ops agent or whatever the hell. But then it's like a huge team, and the mission went bad, and for some really ridiculous reasons, someone from her former team now tries to kill Mary, even though it's a huge misunderstanding, and it's all just really, really, really silly. I appreciate that they tried to base this on the story of the 6 Napoleons, which I think is one of the better Sherlock Holmes mysteries from the canon. And I know it also tries to deal a bit more with, Sherlock's addiction, etc., which is always a very interesting aspect of the Sherlock Holmes character, I think, and we're going to come back to that later down the ranking. But I don't know, the Six Thatches just isn't the most interesting of episodes, I think, even though the premise sounds very thrilling. I think they should have put off killing off Mary for the finale of Series 4, like that Euros is maybe directly responsible for Mary's death, that Mary is, maybe in that scenario, able to sacrifice herself so she can get Watson and Holmes out of there. Something like that. I think it would have had a bit more of an impact and would have allowed for Mary to have more development. I think, I think in general Mary is an interesting character. I think I'm going to talk a bit more about her later. But what happens in this episode just isn't very interesting. We also have some really stupidly smart scenes, or kind of comedic, like when Mary travels all across the world, takes on all different kinds of disguises, which is kind of fun to watch. But then like Sherlock just gets to her and she's like, how did you do this? I just did everything at random, at the roll of a dice. And he like goes on about this whole deduction thing where he's like, oh, no choice is ever truly random. Also, I put a GPS tracker in your pen or something like that. And it's just, I don't know, just these kinds of things always kind of feel a little bit out of character for Sherlock. I don't think he would admit that. I think this is also like a lot of a problem that a lot of people like sort of point to say, oh look how dumb this actually is, or this is like this sort of cliche Sherlock Holmes thing to go on about this huge deduction thingy, but then be like, oh no, I don't know, it just didn't really work for me. The next episode, number 11, is The Empty Hearse. Haha, I did not put all of the episodes from Series 4 at the bottom 3, but it's gonna come up soon, don't worry. The Empty Hearse is the first episode of the 3rd series. It's the episode where Sherlock comes back and we find out how he faked his death. Kinda, sorta. Not really. We're gonna talk about it. I think this episode gets a lot of flag for making fun of the Sherlock fandom, or like fan theories. Like, we have this whole shtick throughout the episodes where we see various ways in which Sherlock could have saved himself at the end of Reichenbach Fall. But then it turns out to be like a theory from Anderson or from one of those weird Sherlock fans in his fan club. We even get like a poke at, oh look, it could possibly be gay when Sherlock and Moriarty are about to kiss, which, granted, I was kind of into. But yeah, the episode is poking fun basically at fandom and poking fun at people who like come up with all these elaborate theories, which I can understand a lot of people were upset about. I was never really that kind of person that like is into coming up with fan theories, and yeah, sure, back in the day of the series 2 ad, I like wrote a little fan fiction story about how Sherlock could have possibly saved himself, but it wasn't anything serious. I never really thought about it. I always just took like the last theory Sherlock presents to Anderson as the explanation. I know there's like a heavy insinuation that this is not actually how he did it, since Anderson is like, why the hell would you tell me that out of all people? You would never tell me this. Which is why a lot of people are still upset that the show never actually delivers the definitive explanation for how Sherlock survived the fall, which I understand is a bit of upsetting. So this is the episode where Sherlock comes back. Hooray! Great. I was looking forward to that, and I thought it was kind of funny that he gets beaten up by Watson a couple of times, because, you know, in the books, it's like Sherlock comes back in disguise, which is kind of accurate, and then Watson is like, oh my god, it cannot be, and then he like faints, and Sherlock helps him, and Watson is like overjoyed that Watson's overjoyed that Sherlock is back. And Sherlock is like, it's also great to see you, my friend. I'm working on a new case, and you have to help me. And then he sort of explains how he survived the fall, etc. And then they go on to defeat Sebastian Moran, so Moriarty's right-hand man. It's the story of the empty house, which is a great story, I think. And they do it differently in this, because I think it's very understandable that Watson would be absolutely furious that he would punch Sherlock in the face. I remember when I literally watched that for the first time, I was really satisfied with that happening. I think it's also cute that we already get the introduction of Mary in this episode. Granted, I think I personally prefer the way it happens in canon, that we get introduced to her through a mystery, and then Watson proceeds to like fall in love with her as the story goes on. And here we basically just have a time jump of like, I don't know, 2 or 3 years, and Watson has gotten to know Mary over that time and is about to propose to her. I guess it's sort of understandable that Watson would try to move on, and that's how he meets Mary. So I guess it's sort of a logical introduction for Mary in that regard. Still, I think I sort of preferred more how it happens in the canon. And I like that we get some interesting character dynamics and chemistries in this. Like, we see Watson and Mary, naturally. We see Watson being very furious with Sherlock, like angrier than we've ever seen him before, which is very understandable. And thus we have Sherlock interacting with more of the secondary characters, like with Molly and Lestrade, and even with Anderson, which I think is great. Especially like the moments we get with Molly in this episode, I think are good, since they sort of show that Sherlock has learned to like not just use her, manipulate her, to actually like be a good, like he's trying to be a good friend to her, and that she is slowly moving on from this crush she has on him. So this episode is a little bit more about, I think, the emotional character dynamics and relationships. Well, I think it's okay, and we do get some interesting moments here and there that are thrilling, like when Mary and Sherlock try to find Watson before he gets burned to a crisp. But in regards to the mystery, the case, oh boy, is it boring and forgettable. I had to look up what actually happened, and there's this whole bomb thing going on with the bomb threat that's like meant to blow up Parliament on the 5th of November, naturally. And the guy who tries to blow up Parliament is Lord Moran. I completely forgot that. That's literally how they write off Moran in BBC Sherlock. He's just like some random dude who wants to blow up Parliament. Why would you make Moran so boring? You could have made him like a huge villain, or at least like a secondary antagonist. Like, it would make sense that after Moriarty died, Moran would be really upset and try to get to Sherlock. So why would you not use that? He could be like an evil Watson, since he was also in the army at some point. You know, kind of like in the Robert Downey Jr. versions. And they try to like use this to make Sherlock and John friends again in a really stupid scene where John thinks he's about to be blown up and he's telling Sherlock how much he actually means to him, that he cares about him, and of course he forgives him. And it just turns out, oh no, Sherlock is just being a huge wanker and is like, ha, psych, the bomb's actually not gonna go off. I just wanted to hear you say that you like me. And wow, it's a dick move. Like, I know Sherlock is not the most sociable person in the canon, and that he's even a bit more of a dick in the series, but wow, what a twat. So yeah, I do like sort of some of the character dynamics and relationship moments we get in this, but other than that, in regards to like actual case solving and mysteries, boring episode. Next up, number 10, The Lying Detective. So this is the second episode of Series 4, which is, you know, Series 4, as you've noticed, not the best series of Sherlock, but I think The Lying Detective is the best episode out of the 3 we got in Series 4, because it doesn't focus too much on like weird Holmes family stuff like the last episode, and it's not as forgettable and boring as the first episode of Series 4, I think. It adapts one of my favorite Sherlock Holmes mysteries, The Dying Detective, which is great, where Sherlock basically pretends that he's dying, and he even has to fool Watson and tell him, no, I don't want you as my doctor, you have to call someone else, and that other doctor turns out to be the bad guy. It's a great story, I think, and that's what they sort of adapt here. And in The Lying Detective, it's all about is his name Culverton Smith, who Sherlock is convinced is a serial killer. After like, is it Culverton's daughter? I don't actually remember. Euros in disguise, basically, as we find out later, comes to Sherlock and is like, I think my dad or someone I know is about to kill someone. I'm pretty sure we did it like a couple of times. And Sherlock at first is like, not sure I'm into that. But then in what I think is a very sweet moment, a very touching moment, is that Sherlock realizes that the lady in front of him is suicidal. And he says, no, you're not going to leave. I'm going to spend the day with you because I don't want you to hurt yourself. So let's go and just have a good time. And I think that's great. That's a fantastic moment, I think, for Sherlock. Which shows that he has empathy. But then it all goes haywire when the lady disappears, and Sherlock is like, oh, okay, no, I have to find out who this weird serial killer guy in the hospital is. And he manages to rope in Watson, more or less. The thing is, this is the episode right after Mary dies, and Watson is pissed off with Sherlock. Like, hugely pissed off, because he blames him for Mary dying, which I think is kind of stupid since Mary basically just sacrificed herself jumping in front of a bullet, but there you go. And Watson more or less reluctantly goes with Sherlock on this case, and I think it's the most interesting case that we get in this, and I just love how very obviously evil and cunning Smith is. It's just so much fun to watch the actor just being absolutely diabolic and basically having a laugh telling these people, ooh, I'm a serial killer. We get a couple of neat little cinematographic moments, I think, like when Sherlock does the whole deduction thing and he's basically in the street and like pulls the window and all that. It looks neat, even though, again, it's sort of this case of Sherlock, the BBC Sherlock series, trying to be a little bit over the top smart and cool with what it does. But, you know, part of me enjoys it, even though I know it's a bit much, but part of me enjoys watching that. The thing is, I don't feel like I can say too much about this. Just like, this is the one episode in Series 4 I kind of enjoy watching. And I like the confrontation Sherlock and John have in, is it the mortuary? Where like Sherlock picks up a scalpel and he like threatens Culverton Smith, and Watson just goes again absolutely haywire, like punches Sherlock, and they have this interesting intense back to back, I think, and then we think Sherlock is almost about to get murdered by Smith, and then it turns out that he's actually planted a listening device and Smith has been defeated. And yeah, I think it's the one episode of series 4 that's enjoyable for like the actual mystery that is going on in the episode, but also for doing some interesting character work. Number 9 is The Sign of 3. So this is the second episode of the third series. It's the episode where John and Mary get married. It's the wedding. It's an absolutely wonderful, beautiful, gorgeous wedding. Everyone looks fabulous in this episode. And I think it's cute because I like it when we include Watson's wedding, and Sherlock is naturally the best man. It's a fantastic opportunity to have some jokes in there, and they do make jokes. Not all of them land, if you ask me. Like the whole opening with Sherlock calling Lestrade and being like, "You have to come here. It's a huge emergency." Like Lestrade comes in with like cars, helicopters, and everything, and Sherlock is like, "How do you write a good best man speech?" Which is, I think, dumb. But yeah, Sherlock is the best man, and the episode is sort of centered around not only the wedding, but the speech Sherlock gives at the wedding, where he goes through some cases, some unsolved cases, or some interesting cases he and John have tried to solved over the years. And we also get to see like the Stag Night, which I'm gonna be honest, I'm not a huge fan of. I know it's funny that like Sherlock tries to calculate how much alcohol they can drink and how drunk they get, and when everyone has to, pee and all that. And it's kind of funny to see Sherlock Holmes drunk, because they're thinking that man would never ever get drunk, which is probably why I don't like this too much. And then they like go and try to solve the case while they're completely pissed. And I don't know, it's just a bit too ridiculous for me, I guess, because I think that kind of humor doesn't really work with these characters. I completely understand why some people would enjoy this whole Stag Night montage very much. I can definitely see that. I remember watching this for the very first time, thinking this was absolutely hilarious. That was peak Sherlock Holmes comedy. But well, there you go. Another mystery, one of the main mysteries that goes on throughout the episode, is the Mayfly Man, where they try to find out how people get mysteriously stabbed and die like minutes or hours later. And I think that's an interesting mystery, and I like when Sherlock like goes into detective mode, like jumps over the table and deduces his way through the finale of the episode, and John is immediately alerted and tries to find out what's going on. I like that. I like what's going on there. I like that we try to, this episode tries to like combine Watson's wedding and the history Sherlock and John have shared with a mystery that's actively going on right now. I think it does a good job at that. I think, again, John and Mary have some wonderful moments here and there. Even though I think Mary should maybe have more actual impactful moments at her own wedding episode. I know it's because Sherlock is there and he's like the best man, so naturally it's him telling stories about Sherlock and about himself and John. And Mary says like she has no family, which we find out about later, so not really anything going on there. I think it's not a bad episode. It's not necessarily one of the best episodes, but I think it's enjoyable enough, and I think it's always fun to have the Watson-Mary wedding in there. It even ends on a surprisingly somber, even sad note, with Sherlock leaving the wedding early, which is something that gets foreshadowed earlier in the episode. And him playing the waltz for Mary and John, I think, is very, very sweet. And it's a cute episode, but it's maybe not as eventful as I had hoped it would be, which is why it's more like in the middle of the list. Number 8, The Blind Banker. So this is the second episode of the first series, and at some point, The Blind Banker used to be the worst Sherlock episode. And over the years, I have learned to appreciate this episode. It's a very basic Sherlock mystery. It's just Sherlock and John getting involved in a case that has to do with like the Chinese part of town, and you know, sort of like Chinese mafia almost. And that's it, just Sherlock and John on a case. And I like that. You're gonna start missing that off the series too. Just these episodes where Sherlock and John go and solve a case. The only really personal stuff we get in this is that Watson has a girlfriend for one episode, and they have to save her at the end, which is kind of dumb since it's sort of a damsel in distress moment. But you know, and it's in the middle of the list because it's not bad. It's just like your bog standard Sherlock mystery, which isn't the most interesting or thrilling case they've worked on throughout the series. What always bothered me is that, you know, they find this symbol, this tagline, what they think is a tagline, graffiti tagline, and they only find out like days, weeks later that this is about Chinese numerals. And I'm thinking, how would you not find out about that earlier? Like they find out about almost by coincidence, since they go to Chinatown and then they see that some of the price tags are in Chinese numerals. And I'm like, how would you not find that out earlier just by Googling shit? I don't know. I would just think they would come up with this earlier. It just feels like in some places that they are making this mystery longer than it has to be. Because again, you would think some of this stuff is either on the internet or Sherlock or Book Sherlock would have figured this out hours ago. And you know, it's a cute episode, and it has some interesting vibes and interesting elements. Again, it's just like a book standard Sherlock Holmes mystery for this series, which is not very great, but it's not bad. But you know, it's this kind of nice little relaxing episode you can put on in the background and have a good time with. Number 7, His Last Vow. So this is the final episode of series 3. This is the episode where Sherlock and Watson come head to head with, well, in this case, it's not Charles Augustus Milverton, it's Magnuson, because he's played by a Danish actor. He's played by Mads Mikkelsen's brother, who's, I think, called Lars Mikkelsen. I hope I did not get that wrong. But yeah, he's played fantastically by that actor. I think he's having a lot of fun playing the Napoleon of blackmail, as they put it. And I think he's a formidable foe for Holmes and Watson, because I like that he is not menacing in a way that he could kill you at any time, or he's especially violent or vicious, or he has all his henchmen out watching you. He's not like Moriarty in that way. He doesn't have this like crime network where you feel like you could die as soon as you walk around a corner. He has what I think is a very realistic network of just like media. Like, what can you do against that? He just has information. That's his weapon. Information that he can use on you. Like, he finds out about stuff you've done in your past, or he manipulates the media, the press against you. And I think, especially now, a couple of years later, this is a very, very real threat. I think if you rewatch this episode now, or remade it now, and include a bit more like actual like social media and Twitter and that kind of stuff, that would still be a very, very relevant theme. And they become so desperate now, back in the corner where they actively don't know what they are supposed to do. And Sherlock just ends up shooting the man because there's literally nothing else they can do. Like, Magnuson threatens Watson's life. He threatens Mary. And Sherlock's got nothing he can do, and he can just shoot him. Which ends up not really having consequences, if you ask me. But I think it's an interesting dilemma they put him in, because you could argue Magnuson defeated Sherlock. At the end of that episode, Sherlock has been defeated to a point where he's literally forced to kill to get out of it. And I think that's interesting. It's a very not necessarily like action heavy episode with like explosion and shooting, etc. But it's an emotionally thrilling episode, since this is also the episode where we find out about Mary, that she, used to be like I don't know, MI5, MI6 special agent, and she's good with guns, basically, and can kick some butt. And, oh boy, she kicks some butt, she shoots Sherlock in the chest, that's what happens, and we get what, I'm not gonna deny it, is a pretty cool sequence with Sherlock only having a couple of seconds of consciousness left to make sure that he does not die from this wound, and we run through this whole mind palace scenario with, like, Molly being there doing the medical examining thing, and Mycroft being there, and even Moriarty is in his mind palace, which I think is absolutely amazing. And fight me on this, I think that whole sequence is fantastic. So yeah, the episode has some great cinematography moments, I think in general, and also especially interesting character moments as well. This is a very not happy at all, heavy episode for Watson, who finds out that his wife is basically an assassin. And Martin Freeman delivers some fantastic acting, I think, in this episode. Like, especially in this whole scene when they all come back to Baker Street and have the big talk, and Watson is like, but why? Like, everything in my life was weird and fucked up, even you, Sherlock, but why did Mary have to be like this? Like, she was supposed to be my anchor, she was supposed to be normal, she was supposed to, like, you could almost argue, save me from all this bullshit that's been going on in my life. And Sherlock's like, because you chose her. And Watson has, like, this great moment where he's like, why is everything always my fault? And he, like, kicks the chair over, and I think that's, such good dramatic acting right there. And I like how Watson almost kind of takes charge that way. He's like, okay, no, I want to find out. Mary, you're going to tell me, and we're going to talk this out, and then we find out, okay, yeah, Watson is upset, and they need to work through this, but he loves Mary unconditionally, and he doesn't need to know everything about the past in order to be together with her, and I think that's cute. That's a good message. And yeah, I think this is a solid series finale. It's not as high up as some of the other episodes, simply because I think the other episodes are more engaging or more interesting in regards to what they do with the characters and what they do with the mysteries. And in this, we don't have like a huge case or mystery per se. It's mainly just about, okay, we find out who Mary truly is, and then we work through that. And, I think that works well and gives some character development to Mary, who does not get any character details whatsoever in the books, so you can basically do anything you like with her. And I think she was a good character, or interesting character for how long she was there. Like I said earlier, I think they should have given her more development before killing her off, like I said, maybe in the finale of Series 4. Because I think it would have been interesting to explore more of Mary's past and what she's done. And we get that sort of in the first episode of Series 4, where the past sort of comes back to haunt her, but wasn't really her fault, because it was more of a misunderstanding. But in general, I think Mary was a good addition to the series, and Amanda Abington did a fantastic job with what she was given. But at the end of the day, a bit more run-of-the-mill episode. It's not bad, but it's also not one of the best episodes. Number 6, A Scandal in Belgravia. So this is the first episode of Series 2, which is arguably my favourite series, I think, in BBC Sherlock. Now, I would have, if you had asked me a couple of years ago when this episode first aired, I would have probably ranked this episode higher, but over the years, I've come to realize that many elements in this episode are not that good, which have mostly to do with the character of Irene Adler. So this is, as you can guess, based on A Scandal in Bohemia, which is the one episode that stars Irene Adler. And I've talked many, many times about Irene Adler and the relationship/friendship she has with Sherlock in the canon. And I think it starts off very interestingly that they make her very independent and make her actually defeat Sherlock, that he does not win. At first, that is. You could argue, did they have to make her a dominatrix? Did that really have to be a thing they did? Because, in the original, she's like an opera singer. Couldn't they have just done that? Or like an actress the theatre, something like that. Sherlock Holmes likes acting. He likes the theatre. He likes opera. So why could you just not do the same? Maybe they wanted to have sort of sex as a weapon against Sherlock, since they sort of kind of play with that throughout the episode, that Sherlock might be scared of sex, which is weird because that's not how that works. And I think it's kind of ridiculous that she like comes in when they first meet and she is completely naked and Sherlock can't deduce anything from that. I don't think it works like you can still read like her posture, her facial expressions, I don't know, the way she wears her hair, the way she put on her makeup, or I don't know, Sherlock will probably still be able to find some kind of deduction hints or clues in there. But there you go. Now, I enjoyed this episode because Laura Pulverstanding is amazing. She is a wonderful actress, and I think she has a lot of fun with the Irene Adler character. And I mostly like how they portray the chemistry between Sherlock and Irene Adler. I kind of like that she tries to flirt with him, since I think it's an interesting aspect of the Sherlock Holmes character to address. This would have been a fantastic episode for the show to just be like, no, this doesn't work, because Sherlock Holmes, in our version, is ace, so this stuff doesn't work on him. This would have been a great episode to explore that. But naturally, we all know that Moffat is not about explicitly saying anything about Sherlock's sexuality in this series, or that asexuality is boring. So we unfortunately do not get that. But I kind of like some of the elements they put in there and how they play with it. And like I said, I enjoy the character of Irene Adler because the actress has a little fun with it. And what I don't like is that they make her dependent on Moriarty. I think they should not have done that, because Irene is an amazing adventurous in the original story. She is completely independent. She defeats Sherlock by herself. She goes off and marries someone else, leaves England, and wins. And she does all of that by herself. She doesn't need Moriarty. And that's maybe a bit of a problem where Moffat and Gatiss try too hard to make everything connect with Moriarty. So, and then we have the end of the episode, where we have Mycroft, Sherlock, and Irene. And Irene is like, ooh, Moriarty gave me tips how to play the Holmes boys, and I've won, etc., blah, 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 blah. And then Sherlock defeats her by revealing that she has fallen in love with him and had this stupid passcode on her phone, which I bet so many people put into their phones if it was possible. Which I'm not gonna judge. I'm not judging. I would have totally done that if I had a phone at that time. But I just hated that they did that. Because again, in the original story, it's like Irene wins. She beats Sherlock and leaves. She does not fall in love with him. He does not fall in love with her. He breaks into her house and tries to trick her, but she's like, that did not work. Bye. I got my husband, gonna leave. And we don't get that. And that's stupid. Instead, we have Irene falling in love with Sherlock at the end of this, and then Sherlock even has to save her. She gets herself almost killed in, I don't know, some country. She almost gets herself beheaded, but then Sherlock is there and apparently fights off a bunch of terrorists. And I want to know how that even worked out. I can see some reference there to The Private Life of Sherlock Holmes, which I recently reviewed. You can definitely see some influences there in regards to the Irene Adler character and the ending there. This is not a complete fuck up of an episode like some of the others down the list, but especially in retrospect a couple of years later, you realize that this is maybe not the best episode, and that Moffat definitely has a problem with writing women and trying to be smarter than the source material. So this is why Scandal of Belgravia is number 6. Number 5, The Hounds of Baskerville. So this is episode 2 of series 2, and this is our horror, spooky episode for BBC Sherlock. And I like that. I'm a horror fan. I like the spooky vibes they go with, because The Hound of the Baskervilles is also arguably one of the spookiest, if not the spookiest Sherlock Holmes story in the canon. And I like most of the things they do with it here. I especially enjoy the character of Henry, what he goes through and how he interacts with Holmes and Watson throughout the episode. I kind of like that in the beginning they tease the original canon where Watson goes off by himself to the Baskervilles and has to work on the case by himself for a good time before he meets up with Sherlock. And they tease that in the beginning of this episode only to be like, no, Sherlock's gonna go with John. I think it would have actually been interesting to have Watson be on his own for a while to solve a case, like we see in one of the later episodes I'm going to talk about. But unfortunately, we don't get that. Again, I think they have some kind of cute moments here. I think it's cute that Sherlock's the one who has to drive because Martin Freeman doesn't have a license, I think. Because you would think that Watson would be the one to drive the car. But that doesn't happen. I like how this episode plays with, this emotional turmoil that Sherlock doesn't like to be in, that he's often very, machine-like, cold and calculating. He doesn't like showing open emotions, especially not fear. Which I think is an interesting moment when they see the Hound for the first time and they're realizing, oh, it's real. And Sherlock is like, look at this. I'm afraid. I'm never afraid. How could this happen? How dare you? And I actually kind of like that he has this emotional outburst where he does like a huge deduction, only to like prove that he is not angry. And I don't know. I kind of like it that they address this, that Sherlock, especially after this point, has been very removed from emotions, but that he is not incapable of having them. And that we'd see in later episodes that he actually sort of picks up emotions, basically, so to speak. But I kind of like how they address this here. I like that the Hound is real. I think even though it's a bit ridiculous how they play with like hallucinations and that sort of stuff, and how it factors into like this weird military base, which I'm not sure if I enjoy that in any way as a setting. Maybe I'm just like very neutral about it. And like most of these episodes, the Hounds of Baskerville has elements that I think are very interesting and fun to watch, and also elements that I think are stupid. Mock me if you want, but the scene where we see Sherlock going into his mind palace for the first time, I like that. I think it looks good. I think it looks interesting. Because especially at that point when this episode aired for the first time, I'd never seen anything like it. And I thought it was a cool visualization of what goes on in Sherlock's brain. And granted, the whole Mind Palace thing gets drawn out a bit as the show goes on. But I think like this first time that we get to see it, I think it's cool. I thought this was really interesting. And you can't tell me that I was the only one who like tried to do this whole Mind Palace thing himself after this episode aired. You can't tell me I'm the only person who did that. I like it. I like it as a concept. I know they didn't come up with it. I think they like got their inspiration from the Hannibal Lecter novels in regards to like the whole Mind Palace thing. But I think it works especially for a character like Sherlock. So I thought that was interesting. But then again, some of the like lab elements that we get, like when John tries to investigate the lab and he gets exposed to the gas or something. And then we find out later Sherlock tried to like scare him, but John wasn't actually drugged. But he kind of was, and it's completely ridiculous, I thought, because Sherlock like thinks it's in the sugar, and it's not in the sugar. But by coincidence, John got exposed to the gas anyway, which is why the whole fear thing worked for. I don't even know what the reason was for that. Why they had that in there. I don't know. It's kind of dumb. It's kind of dumb to have this little romance thing. What's next going on with the doctor? Like Henry's doctor? I don't know. again, some really ridiculous elements in there, but I think in general, it's like the vibes of this episode are fun. We get sort of more spooky horror stuff in this episode, and again, it explores some interesting themes in regards to Sherlock, the character. So yeah, I think this is like a good. It's a good solid episode, I think, for the series. Number 4, A Study in Pink. This is the very first episode of BBC Sherlock. It's probably the episode I've watched the most. I think I can quote this entire episode to this very day. Like, do all of the deductions, everything. I just love this episode. I think it's a great first episode because I think in general, like, first episodes of any series tend to be definitely not the best kind of episodes. So it's I think this episode does a fantastic job to introduce newcomers to the Sherlock Holmes canon, to these characters. But I think it also does a lot of good stuff for like people who were already familiar with the canon, but do enough of new stuff to get lovers of the canon in there. So this episode loosely adapts the events of a study in Scarlet, and I think it adapted very well, or most of the parts. Good thing that they cut out this whole religious American background, I think Mormon background story that is in the book, which is really weird. So yeah, have that one not be there, which I think is good. And I like the solution that he's a cabbie, because I just love that as a premise, because like Sherlock mentions throughout the episode, it's someone who you, especially in a big city like London, you encounter every day, you have to deal with every day, and you don't even notice they're there. And which is why they can move through the city unnoticed, almost invisible. And I think that's cool, it's a great reveal. And this whole finale with just the two of them talking, you could argue it's kind of unnecessary, because it's this first instance of Sherlock just trying to be like, oh, look at how smart I am and I want to figure this out because I'm cool, even though I could, like, the cops are right there, I could just call Lestrade and he doesn't. And I remember I was 13 years old when this episode came out, and I was sitting in front, like directly in front of the telly, and screaming at it, being like, no, Sherlock, what are you doing? No, he offers you the pills, don't take it, it's really stupid, don't do it. I was heavily involved in that when I was 13 years old, so it did a good job. And I liked especially what it did with Watson, that he comes back and he has not PTSD necessarily, but you know, that the war actually left an impact on him. I like that. I like how they go around this whole, where's Watson's wound actually? Is it in the leg or is it in the shoulder? Since Arthur Conan Doyle was kind of vague about that at times. I like how they play that in. I know that this is basically like extended version of the original pilot episode, which is cute. The original pilot is absolutely adorable. It was 60 minutes long, and then the network, so like the BBC, said, great, we want to make the series, but how about 90 minutes? So that's why we have Mycroft in this. And I initially liked Mycroft a lot when I saw him, because he's like Sherlock in many ways, but even more calculating and emotionally removed. And I like that in this first episode they play with, could this be Moriarty? Since Sherlock is like, oh, you just met my worst enemy, you're thinking, oh, it's Moriarty. But then it turns out it's actually his brother, and I think that's kind of funny. And I like how they build the relationship between Sherlock and John throughout this episode. And you can definitely tell by the end of the episode, yes, these two men are going to be best friends. They're going to go on great adventures and solve so many cases, and it's going to be so much fun. And I just think this is a solid mystery which follows, I think, more so than any of the other episodes, like the straight up, more or less story of the original canon novel it's based on. And I think it's a fantastic introduction episode, and does a lot of things right, and has a lot of like fun little tidbits to like tickle your Sherlock brain when you have read the original stories. And I don't know, I just liked it a lot. It's like the episode, it's like I watched this episode back when it aired for the first time, and it immediately got me into this. I was like, this is going to be a fantastic series. So Study and Pink did a very good job, I think. Okay, we're getting into the top 3. And my number 3 is The Abominable Bride. So this is the special. And I love this episode. I'm so glad they did an episode where they have these actors in the original setting of the stories. I think that is amazing because they look so good. They look so good. I think Benedict Cumberbatch in general is fantastic casting for a character like Sherlock Holmes. And look at him in that Victorian getup. It looks so good on him. And I just love the Victorian vibes that we get throughout the episode. The costumes and the style and the looks. It's so much fun to watch. That's basically a huge part of why I like this episode so much. Just because it's Victorian times. At one time we get to see these actors do everything in the original setting. And I think it looks great. And what I love even more is that it ties into the plot of the series. And even more so that it's tied to Sherlock's drug problems. I was so happy when I did that, when I watched that episode for the first time. I was like, they're actually doing it. They're actually tying this to Sherlock having an active drug problem, and this is him basically having a drug-induced dream or something like that. I love that they did that. And I like how they play with it, how much of this is actually in Sherlock's brain, how much is going on the plane where he actually is. But I like how it's mostly, for the most part, like 70% of it is removed from the plot of the series. How it mostly does its own thing, and then sort of towards the end it tries to tie it to what is actually happening in like the 21st century storyline. And I like how all of the characters are brought into this, like naturally get Sherlock and John and Mrs. Hudson, but we even get Molly in there, and she like has to cross-dress in order to be a doctor, which I think is cute. Even Anderson is there. And we get a couple of references to some of the canon stories, like the 5 Orange Pips, which I think is cool. But also the story they just play with, like the Ricoletti murder case, I think is very interesting and very, very Victorian, I think. How I feel about this end reveal, that it's all about, the suffragette movement and, women's independence, I'm not quite sure about that. Especially since throughout the episode they make Watson to be the misogynist and the sexist, and Sherlock at the end is like, we should listen to the women, Watson. We should listen to the women. And Watson's like, oh, women have rights. Oh my god. I think it would have been more effective if he switches around, because this is how it works in Victorian times. I mean, not saying that Watson is not sexist at all, because he's still very much a white Victorian man. But, out of the two, Sherlock is the one who expresses misogynistic opinions most of the time compared to Watson. So why did they switch around? Why did they make Watson look like an idiot? Especially since he's the one who's married to a really cool woman. So yeah, I enjoyed the episode. The vibes, fantastic. There's one scene in this, which drives me nuts. It's when Sherlock and John have to observe the house and just like sit there during the night, and they have a conversation, and it goes on about like Sherlock's machine-like nature, why he doesn't have empathy or emotions, and it even goes on to mention Irene Adler. And we have this insistence on Watson being like, you're human, you're flesh, you must have urges. Why are you not interested in emotional attachment? Why are you not into Irene Adler? You must have that. I'm like, no, he really doesn't. Because that man is asexual. And sure, you could argue, oh, but this is the Victorian storyline. Watson wouldn't get it. Oh, come off it. Especially since it happens in like Sherlock's brain. And you could argue Watson in the books is very understanding of Sherlock not wanting or not being interested in women or any kind of romantic relationship. So why does the show keep on insisting to say, oh, but Sherlock should be interested in Irene, or he should have urges, but why doesn't he? Just drives me crazy. And another little thing, which is more of a personal issue I have with almost any Sherlock Holmes adaptation, is at the end when we see Sherlock and Moriarty and eventually also Watson at the Reichenbach Falls. And they fight and they kick him down the waterfall. Why can almost no Sherlock Holmes adaptation get the Reichenbach Falls correctly? I was there on holiday a couple of years ago. It does look nice, and it is big. It is a big waterfall, but it does by no means look as huge and epic as so many adaptations make it out to be. So why do you keep... Have you ever looked at a photograph of the Reichenbach Falls? Have you been there? Because then you would know the way it looks in this episode and so many other adaptations doesn't work. And I should make it... Maybe I'm gonna make a video about that one day, how adaptations just can't get Reichenbach Falls right. But yeah, apart from those two little things, I like the special a lot just because I'm a huge fan of the whole Victorian vibe. So that's why it's number 3. Number 2, The Great Game. So this is the finale of the very first series of BBC Sherlock. And I like it because it's just like a very interesting battle of wits and of case solving. And we don't have necessarily one huge mystery, but we have like a number of cases Sherlock has to solve as he fights Moriarty throughout the episode. And I think that's great because you take the opportunity to have Sherlock solve several interesting cases throughout the episode. Maybe you have one that's not as interesting, but then you have another one where Sherlock is like, oh yeah, he's really in it, he's solving it. And I think that's cool. This is like Sherlock Holmes at its best, just him and Watson solving a bunch of cases, going from place to place, working with Lestrade, working with clients, solving cases. And in the end, it all comes together in this big finale where we see Moriarty for the first time. And it starts off already setting our expectations high. Like, Baker Street literally almost gets exploded in the opening of the episode. You're immediately like, oh, shoot, okay, we're onto something in this episode. And you feel the constant threat as Sherlock is under pressure to solve these cases. And then we meet Moriarty, the swimming pool. Andrew Scott, I love him so much. And I think he's a very unusual Moriarty. He's definitely not what you expected. Especially if you've read the stories. You're like, okay, he's this sophisticated man who's a bit older than Sherlock, who is, like a fox, and he's smart and calculating and very in control of himself and what's going on. And then we have Andrew Scott's Moriarty just walk in and is all over the place emotionally and is a bit campy, which I think is fun. I just love how Andrew Scott plays him. It's very entertaining to watch, and the main reason why at least one of the main reasons why I enjoy the first 2 series of Sherlock so much, because Moriarty is just so much fun as a villain in this show. The problem is I think they started to rely on him too much of the series 2, where they try to be like, oh, he could be back, but he actually never is. They should have just been done with him after series 2 and then introduced a new villain. Or have Moran be there. Well, yeah, I like The Great Game. I think it's a very... I think it plays the best with just classic Sherlock Holmes scenario. Just have Sherlock and John solve cases and even throw Moriarty in there to up the ante. And I don't know, I just think we have some cute little moments in there, especially between Watson and Holmes. We have this whole astronomy argument, which I think is cute. Even though I still think it's silly or ridiculous how Sherlock solves this mystery with the painting where it's the Van Buren supernova in the painting, and I'm like, how would you know that? I want to know how that worked, because we just see him on the phone typing some stuff and it's all way too fast because like this boy dies in like 10 seconds or something, and then he's like the supernova in the painting, we should not be there, and how just literally how. But yeah, apart from that, I think all the other mysteries work well. I like Jane's cars with like the gods of two faces. I think that's interesting. The one with the golem is kind of weird and ridiculous as well, but I think it works mostly. I like that in this episode we also get introduced to like Sherlock's homeless network, which is again a connection to the canon where Sherlock engages like these little street kids, the big street regulars, but in this case, which I think it makes sense for modern adaptation, it's the homeless people, which I think works rather well. I like they sneak in Moriarty before you even know that it's Moriarty, like with Molly's boyfriend, even though I think the whole deduction afterwards about like how he is gay is kind of dumb, especially considering Andrew Scott himself is gay in real life. And it's sort of, I don't know, it doesn't sit entirely right with me that this show is basically like, you can, like, this is the gay look, and Sherlock can immediately deduce what your sexuality is from how you look, because he can see your underwear and because you style yourself really nicely. Like, no, that's not how that works. Maybe he just likes looking that way. Maybe he just likes looking that way and he's the straightest man you've ever met. I don't know. In case you haven't guessed, BBC Sherlock doesn't handle sexuality very well, which is a whole nother argument we could talk about. But I think in general, this is a very interesting episode. I think it's a fantastic finale to the first series of Sherlock. But now we have number one, and it is the Reichenbach Fall. So this is the finale of series 2. And this was, I didn't really have to think about it. For me, it was clear this is my favorite BBC Sherlock episode. Because it has everything. It has an interesting case. It has Sherlock versus Moriarty. It has emotional stakes. It has action, drama. It has the whole Reichenbach scenario at the end. It leaves you with an absolute emotional cliffhanger. And then we had to wait for so long to figure out how Sherlock did it, and then we never actually did find out how he did it, but who cares. But yeah, I just love that episode. It opens up in the most dramatic way possible, like with Watson seeing a therapist and being like, I'm here because my best friend died, and you're realizing, okay, it's this episode. Like, canon, people have read the canon are like, okay, it's this episode. Okay, so this is what we're doing. And similar to what I mentioned with Magnuson earlier, Sherlock is pushed to a point where he can't do anything. Because Moriarty has got everything figured out. Like, he gets himself arrested on purpose only so he can be like, you've got nothing on me. I can get to everyone I want. I can literally rob the Bank of England if I wanted to. I'm not doing it, but I'm showing you I can. And then he just, like, is on display so everyone can see what he can actually do. I think that's fantastic. It's so much fun. Then we get this interesting scene between Moriarty and Sherlock in Baker Street, where Moriarty basically lays out his plan and is like, oh, it's going to start very soon, Sherlock, the fall, and we're going to play this whole game, and you're probably going to die. I mean, he's got it right about that. And I like that the stakes are high from the very beginning in this episode. Like, it's a constant adrenaline rush that we get throughout this episode. And I find this idea of like Moriarty deconstructing Sherlock and his image very interesting, that he has manipulated everyone around Sherlock, has manipulated the media, whoever else you could think of, into believing Moriarty does not exist. He's an actor and Sherlock is a fraud, which is something that has been brought up in earlier episodes as well. And I think it's an interesting argument, and it's something that some other adaptations occasionally pick up as well. To be like, if Sherlock isn't actually that great, either it's someone else who solves the cases for him, or he absolutely just fakes all of it. And I think that's interesting because it goes to a point where you could sometimes think, yeah, he did have opportunity to do that, or, it kind of seems like a thing he would do. Like, you never full on believe that everything was fake up to this point, even though that would have been interesting, I imagine. But I like how it plants these little seeds of doubt in that occasion where you're like, okay, maybe. And I like how Moriarty is a constant presence throughout the episode. Like, we see him in the very beginning, how he threatens Sherlock. Then we get this whole Richard Brooke shtick, like Sherlock getting in the cab, and Moriarty is there with the videos. You just know he is there. Sherlock could get killed any time by either one of Moriarty's henchmen or one of the assassins who tries to kill him. And it's just like a constant threat that's looming in the background over Sherlock and also Watson. And I like that in this episode we see how unconditional Watson's, well, I'm going to say love for Sherlock is as his best friend. That he's like, no, I know you for real. I'm going to follow you through this. And then it all culminates in this great finale on the rooftop, which, I just love. Just Andrew Scott and Benedict Cumberbatch have great chemistry. And I think it's a very interesting Moriarty-Holmes dynamic that we get in this series, because you can tell these two are the smartest people in the room, in any room, and you just don't know who's going to come out on top, because you feel like they constantly outsmart each other on every level. And you seriously fear for Sherlock, because you don't know where this is going to end, especially if you've read the original story. You're like, yeah, probably both of them are kind of going to die, I don't know. And when Moriarty shoots himself, I was jumping out of my chair the first time I watched this episode. I was like, what? But how? No, what? No, what? I was just completely emotionally everywhere, which is basically what this entire episode does for 90 minutes. And then we get the dialogue that to this day makes me cry, if I'm being honest. When Sherlock stands on the rooftop, on the edge of the rooftop, and he sees John coming in and he calls him. And that's basically his goodbye note. So he can tell him, this is fine. You don't have to be sad. I faked it, and it's all true. And like how he's trying so hard to make this bearable for Watson, even though we know it doesn't really work. But like the acting is top notch in this. It's just so good, and it just gets you every time, and you just feel Watson's pain. Like this whole conversation between the two of them is already gut-wrenching, and then you see Sherlock fall, and then you get this awful crunching noise when he hits the pavement, and then Watson runs in, and then you see you get a glimpse of Sherlock's corpse, and that image haunts me to this very day. And then Watson gets this whole monologue at Sherlock's grave, which I think is it's just great writing, and Martin Freeman delivers it wonderfully. And then it all culminates, it ends with this last shot of Sherlock behind a tree, leaving you with the worst cliffhanger ever. Like, people till this day complain, oh no, I have to wait until next year till I can find out what happens in my show. Bitch, I had to wait at least 2 years, sometimes even 3 years, to find out what happened after these fucked up cliffhangers in BBC Sherlock. I was there from the beginning, and it was the worst. Oh, side note, something that always bothered me, that in the follow-up episode, Sherlock says that he's not only saw Watson at the grave, but yeah, he heard what he said. And I'm like, bitch, you didn't. You were like 100 meters away. You could not have heard what he said. Because not only were you too far away, Watson was saying it very quietly because he was sobbing. You did not hear what he said at your grave. But that's beside the point. So yeah, I think The Reichenbach is the best BBC Sherlock episode. It has fantastic character moments for not only Watson and Holmes, but also like with some of the other characters like Moriarty and Lestrade and Molly. It manages to combine character development and interesting character chemistry together with just a absolutely thrilling mystery, which is like high adrenaline all the time. Like from the very beginning, it hits you hard and it does not stop until this very, very emotional end. Which is why I think Reichenbach 4 is the best episode of BBC Sherlock. So this is it. We're at the end of this very long episode ranking. As you can tell, I love talking about this show. There's a reason why this is not only one of my favorite Sherlock Holmes adaptations, but one of my favorite TV shows in general, till this very day. And yes, it does get ridiculous after series 2. And we're not talking about the very last episode of series 4, ever. But, you know, I've realized that in recent years, this show has been criticized more and more. And in many ways, I agree with many of these criticisms. But, like, I've noticed that a lot of people, like making fun of this show nowadays and how over the top and silly it was. And, you know, it was at some places, but I still think this was great television. Yeah, sure, it does showcase some of Moffat's classic writing problems. And there's this wonderful, I mean, you probably know this video. There's this wonderful video called Sherlock's Garbage, and Here's Why. I agree with almost everything that's said in that video. It's one of my favorite YouTube videos. I like watching it. But it doesn't stop me from loving the show. Because you can love a show and still be aware of the bad things about it and be critical about them. Which you should always be. And yeah, so this is it for the first video in BBC Sherlock month. Do let me know down in the comments below what your ranking of the episodes is, and what other BBC Sherlock related themes you would like me to talk about, or if you just want to hear my opinions on something, or whatever. If you have any ideas, put them down in the comments below. Thank you so much for watching. Don't forget to like and subscribe if you haven't done it already. And I'll see all of you very soon. Goodbye.